Picking up where we left off, it is clear that composite bows have seen use in pre-Islamic and very early Islamic Arabia in limited numbers, probably being imported from Syria and Persia, and more simplistic primitive style bows, backed with sinew and horn, being made locally. The Umayyad period shows a very rapid and massive shift of Arabic culture, arms and armor due to the gain of resources, and means of manufacturing of several arms and armor, as well as the access to experts in particular fields, one of them being experts of bow making. This period marks the shift of Arabic archery to be overwhelmingly, predominantly, using composite bows. One very crucial country that came under Umayyad rule was the country of Syria, a historical place of production of expertly made bows and expert archers. Rule over this region is what we can owe the massive shift of the use of the more simple self and sinew-backed bows to more complex composite bows. Virtually all depiction of archers of the Umayyad period onward would now show the use of the composite bow. In the construction of these bows, the usual components of horn, sinew, and wood, glued together with animal glues, were used. However, there are some sources that mention a larger ratio of wood to horn and sinew being used. First bow that is important to discuss is the bow mentioned by al-Yunani and al-Marrakeshi, which is that of one of the three old Hijazi bows, called al-Mu'aqqaba or the reinforced bow. This is not to be confused with the Arabic Murakkaba bow, or the Turkish or Persian composite bow, as these three bows, while sharing some similarities, do have their differences. The Arabic self-bow is a topic that I've already discussed in an earlier video. On the reinforced bow, one often wonders what they look like. There are unfortunately no sources that mention these bows in detail, often only mentioning them in passing. The only things that we have to go off of are archaeological findings of bows that might match their description. So something of note is that these bows would have been made of one single stave, or a stave either spliced in at the handle or laminated. These staves in and of themselves would be too short to be used with an acceptable draw length without breaking. One would introduce either sinew or horn or both to have them able to be shot at an acceptable draw length without them breaking. One bow that could possibly fit that description is that of the Yrzi Bow. The Yrzi Bow is a bow that has been found in the Roman-Parthian border in Dura Europos. Dura Europos being what is modern-day Syria. Dura Europos is a very diverse area of the world, consisting of Greeks, Arabs, Romans, Assyrians, and Jews, and it has come in and out of control of many of these cultures. We are aware of the bows of the Romans as they have depicted them in their artworks. As well, we do know the bows of the Parthians as they also similarly have their bows depicted in their artwork. This leaves the Yrzi bow as a mystery because its very subtle and very simplistic curves do not resemble either the artwork of the Parthians or the Romans. Parthians and Romans have always depicted themselves shooting bows of the Hunnic variety with the long angular ears, or that of the Scythian variety with the very aggressive recurved tips. It is possible that this bow represents the bow of the settled Hijazis that live close to the water, and is what would be later considered the reinforced bow or al-Mu'aqqaba. It is important to note, however, that this is only conjecture based on the very little evidence that we have to go off of. The only evidence we have of bone laths being used in the Middle Eastern bows is that of the Yrzi bow. So the Yrzi bow could be one bow that was possibly used from late antiquity all the way up until pre-conquest era. This is along with the Persian and Roman bows that would have been brought in through trade. While the bows of the pre-conquest and early conquest Arabs are relatively unknown, the same cannot be said about the bows of the post-al-Khilafa al-Rashida, as we do have many depictions and a few sources about what these bows looked like. A new front with two superpowers and a much more militarily advanced enemy necessitated the use and production of more advanced weaponry. Thus, the Arabic composite bow was made. It is important to note that almost all historians agree upon archery being mainly an infantry affair from the early Islamic period all the way until the early Abbasid period. The Arabic composite bow has several names, and each of these names do give information about the bow. For example, munfasila means separated, indicating the separate nature of each of the components, that being the horn, sinew, wood, and glue. And murakkaba means connected, constructed, or combined, indicating the combination of those four elements. One very interesting name, however, is the name wasatiyya, sometimes said wasatiyya. This name has sometimes been falsely used to attribute it to the city of Wasat in Iraq. Some sources, however, challenge this claim and call it false, as the Arabic composite bow predates the city of Wasat, which was built by the Umayyad governor al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf in the early 8th century. So this possibly gives us a date in which the Arabic bow might have been first constructed, which would be after the Hijazi era in the Rashidun period and before the construction of the city of Wasat in the Umayyad period. The word wasatiyya also gives us an insight into the construction of the bow. Wasat meaning middle, in so as the bow would occupy a middle position between the Hijazi Arab bow and the Persian or Turkish composite bow. And this bow would occupy a middle position in several aspects. It will also be in the middle in terms of construction, having more wood and less horn and sinew than a Persian or Turkish composite bow. Taking into account the arrow lengths mentioned by many of the masters of Middle Eastern archery, coupled with the fact that all these Middle Eastern masters of archery all agree upon the bow hand anchor, would necessitate that the bow in question would need to be able to handle these very long draw lengths. The bow hand anchor being the idea that the archer must keep drawing the arrow until the arrowhead reaches his thumb. On which part of the thumb that the arrowhead rests is an issue of dispute among them. The draw hand anchors mentioned by the masters also corroborate a very long draw length, sometimes even reaching as far as past the shoulder joint. Techniques regarding the draw of the Arabs will be mentioned in a later video. The arrow length measurements given by the masters were anywhere in between 29 inches to 42 inches in length, with a more reasonable average being in between 29 to 34 inches. Arrows in the upper end of that average would need a bow of significant length to draw to its full potential. Additionally, bows of this size and physical weight necessitate that the arrows be the same, and the arrow weights mentioned in several sources do corroborate this idea. Rarely do the arrows mentioned by the masters go under 8 grain per pound. It is important to note that almost all historians agree upon archery being mainly an infantry affair from the early Islamic period all the way until the early Abbasid period, where more Central Asian units and horse archery techniques and tactics would have been adopted. Pierre Bellon, who was a French traveler and diplomat who lived during the French Renaissance, also did comment on this. The bows and quivers that the Arabs carry are different from that of the Turks. The Arab bows resemble more the Greek bows than the Turkish bows. For the Turks of Asia carry a little bow well braced up, strongly curved and very stiff. But the bows of the Greeks are of two sorts, of which those made in Sphacteria, with the horns of ibex, and those made in Candia, with the horns of buffaloes, both of which being larger than Turkish bows. And since they are larger than the Turkish bows, they must have long and thick arrows quite as much as the bows of the Arabs. For the Arabs have their bows big, because it is necessary for them to use large arrows, contrary to the Turks who have theirs small. The idea of Arab arrows being large and heavy is not a new phenomenon. Tabari narrates from a Persian source during the Battle of Qadsiya, in which the Persians laughed and mocked at the Arab arrows by calling them duk-duk, which means spindle in Persian, referring to their great thickness and barreled shape, with the same source stating that while the arrows from the Nawakiya bows only stuck to the Arab garments, the spindle arrows passed through the Persian coats of mail with relative ease. This statement gives insight to the great momentum carried by the Arab arrows. Light arrows would be more susceptible to loss of energy through wind resistance, which might have been a reason why the Persian arrows might have lost their energy over long distances. and why the Arab arrows might have carried enough momentum to pierce the Persian coat of mail over a long distance. This is also corroborated by the fact that various Crusader chroniclers describe the Turkish arrows as lacking any sufficient penetrative power, simply sticking to the Crusader's armor, which gave him a porcupine appearance. The Turks in this case being the Seljuks. However, the Byzantine princess Anna Komnen remarks on the Turkish arrows having extraordinary penetrative power. One initially might see this as a contradiction, however in context, it makes sense to approach it more circumstantially. It seems more likely the bows of the Seljuks would have excelled in launching a light arrow a great distance, making the arrow carry great speed and penetrative power initially, with rapid loss of momentum due to the lower weight of the arrow causing it to rapidly lose its speed to wind resistance, and thus its penetrative power. This would give the arrow its maximal efficiency when shot at closer ranges. So both accounts most likely gave two different circumstances in which they faced the Turkish arrows, which would both be valid. The Arabic husban or the Persian nawak would have been a tool that was widely used during this period. But this will be discussed in a video in a later date. Now that we've talked about the function and dynamics of an Arabic bow, let's talk about its general shape. The general shape of the Arabic composite bow mirrored the shape that was most common all throughout the Eurasian continent, from Eastern Europe all the way to Far Eastern Asia. That shape being the general reflex handle, reflexed siyas shape, or the Hunnic shape. Bows with the Hunnic shape generally have a double omega profile. Some bows might have also been used via trading and conquest with Persians, as was indicated in some hadith, as well as reports of a siege in which the Arabs equipped themselves with nawakiya bows, which are Persian bows. Siyas of this bow would be passive and non-contact, unlike Manchu bows and Turkish bows. One source also states that the Arabic bows from Al-Hijaz would have recurved siyas, compared to that of a shape of a crescent or a rib, but it would seem that the straight-siyad one would be the one that would become the most common, based on depictions and a few sources. Reinforcing the siyas with anything such as bone or sinew is paramount for any bow of a high draw weight. The handle as well would also be reinforced with bone. Looking from a surface level point of view, one might find it hard to see the difference between an Arabic composite bow and the Persian composite bow. But the difference, while few, can change the dynamics and function of the bow. For one, the siyas of the Arabic bow would not exceed the length of the working limbs. This reduces the leverage that is exerted by the siyas on the limb. As well, the bow is generally larger as mentioned, which is what accommodates the larger and heavier arrows, which would not be the case for the Persian bows, which shoot smaller and lighter arrows. Despite this, the bow most likely would have been inspired by Persian bows, although this would not have been a direct inspiration. The Arabic bows would have likely been inspired by Byzantine bows, which would have been inspired by Persian bows and Hunnic bows from previous invasions. The joint in which the siya meets the limb is called the knee. This in Arabic is called al-rukbah. It is very important to note that the knee is where all the recurvature of the siya occurs. This is contrasted with the case of the Hijazi Arab bows and the Mamluk bows, in which the recurvature would happen at the siya. Some of these bows would have a very characteristic knock, sometimes called a fresco knock. The bottom part will be called al-atara or al-aqaba, meaning the cuticle or the reinforcement respectively. The top part of this would be called al-dhufr or al-asfur, meaning the nail or the bird respectively. On the issue of length, it is hard to say with certainty what the length of the Arab bow was. This likely would be personal preference based on several factors. The length of the bow, more specifically the working section, was determined by how long of an arrow the archer can draw. The method in which the archer would do this is by taking the arrow and measuring it on the belly side of the bow from end to end where the horn ends. With this, the archer would know the limit to where the bow could be drawn safely. However, al-Marakashi states several times in his book al-ifada wa-tabsir likulli ramin mubtada' aw mahir what his maximum recommended bow length was. He gives 3 measurements. He outlines that the bow is composed of 5 parts, the 2 siyas, the grip, and the 2 limbs. And for the length of each part, he says, each part measures a span and a half, or a span and 2/3, and it may not exceed this length. The span measured between my thumb and little finger is around 8 inches. Taking that into consideration, multiplying 1 1/2 of a span by 5 sections would give us 60 inches for a composite bow length. And multiplying 1 2/3 of a span into 5 sections would give us a composite bow length of 66.8 inches. And in another description he says, and this is assuming that the bow length is 3 cubits and a finger long, based on the saying of the poet, I shoot with only this and it is 3 cubits and a finger long. The issue of cubits has long puzzled historians all throughout history. The reason being is that the cubit varies widely based on time period and area. We can, however, at least narrow it down to 2 cubit measurements, those 2 being the black cubit and the Hashimi cubit. Taking into account that the Hashimi cubit measured around 26 3/16 of an inch, and the black cubit measured around 21 1/4 of an inch, doing the calculation for both types of the cubit, these are the possible lengths that we get. With a good degree of certainty, one can rule out the Hashimi cubit as being the cubit mentioned by the author, as the length produced would not be appropriate for a composite bow. Taking the black cubit measurement, this puts us in roughly the same area as the lengths mentioned before. Something also to keep in mind is that the measurement of a bow length is a very old measurement. Some of the poems that were mentioning the bow length were specifically talking about the self-bow. One poem in fact specifically mentioning a far' bow, which is a branch from a main tree. Also of note is a section in al-Markashi's book on when the tip of the bow hits the ground at the moment of loosing. For it to be possible for the lower tip of the bow to hit the ground, the bow would need to be of significant length. This also would be taking into account the shorter stature of the people that lived in the era where the book was written. Taking all of this into consideration, it would be wise to apply a loose and wide range for the Arabic composite bow's length. A safe estimated range would be around 54 to 64 inches in length, with each bow being a custom fit to the archer that shoots it. On the symmetry of the bow, most sources point towards the fact that Arabic bows would have been asymmetric. This would have just been a tradition that was carried over from the ancient period. With the descriptions outlined, one can start to form an image of what an Arabic composite bow might have looked like. A long, non-contact reflex siya bow that was focused on delivering an arrow of great momentum to better pierce coats of mail, made with infantry in mind but well adaptable for horse archery. Attempting to recreate a composite bow, regardless of the design, takes a great degree of expertise, experience, time, and dedication. Taking on the task of making the Arabic composite bow is a difficult one. For the Muslims who have the experience to make a traditional composite bow, it is your religious duty not to let the bow of the people who paved the way to make Islam as widespread as possible be lost to time. The days of making whatever design one feels like and slapping an Arabic or Saracen label needs to come to an end. I urge you to make the Arabic bow and spread the knowledge of what it is and continue the honorable tradition of archery within Islam. One might hear this and think that the intention is to bring down other cultures and to portray a supremacy of the Arabic composite bow over all others. This cannot be farther from the truth, as I respect every culture and their forms of archery. Different bows excel in different tasks, and that is why I own a variation of virtually every single design. No bow of 2 different designs are inherently better than the other. The Arabic composite bow is just one of many. Everything I say is up for discussion and disagreement. I'm not infallible and I make mistakes. I encourage my mistakes to encourage discourse and healthy discussions. If you feel like I have made mistakes, major or minor, please let me know, as I would love to be corrected. I intend to make a video to rectify any mistakes I made in the future, and to also bring more or different evidence to light. This is obviously not to say that I do not stand by what I say and I don't believe in it. The issue of technique, arrows, and archery related innovations such as the majra and similar is one that I have not forgotten, and I intend to address this specifically in a video in the near future. I also intend to do penetration tests akin to how it was done by Todd Cutler to explore the claims of penetrative power or the lack thereof that were mentioned throughout the ages in the Middle East.